The auctioneer had stopped laughing about 30 seconds ago, and that was how Sable knew something had gone terribly wrong. She stood on the platform in a dress that didn't belong to her bare feet cold against the warped wood, her arms still marked from the transport restraints they'd removed an hour earlier. Lot 97. That was what they'd called her. Not a name, not a person. A number scratched onto a card and pinned to her sleeve like a price tag on damaged goods. The bidding hall was enormous, vaulted stone ceilings disappearing into shadow, and every seat was filled. Alphas in tailored coats and polished boots sat in tiered rows that curved around the stage like an amphitheater. The air was thick with their mingled scents, dominance and wealth, and the sharp undercurrent of appetite. The front row alone could have bought a province. She had watched the other Omegas go before her. 43 of them, washed and perfumed and dressed in silks the auction house provided to inflate the price. Each one had drawn bids that climbed in steady increments, voices calling out from the crowd like it was sport. Some fetched thousands, a few fetched tens of thousands. One Omega with rare silver hair and violet eyes had triggered a bidding war that lasted 11 minutes. Then it was Sable's turn. The auctioneer started her at the standard base price, 500 coin. The room went quiet. Not the reverent quiet that followed the silver-haired Omega. This was different, uncomfortable. A silence made of averted eyes and throats being cleared. No one bid. The auctioneer dropped the price. 300, 200, 100, 50. Nothing. Sable stared straight ahead, past the rows of alphas who wouldn't look at her, past the ornate columns, past the enormous arched windows where pale winter light fell in long cold shafts across the floor. She kept her face still. She had learned that skill a long time ago, how to hold an expression like armor, how to make her face say nothing when everything inside was collapsing. The auctioneer cleared his throat and opened his mouth to call the lot unsold. 1 coin. The voice came from the back of the hall, low and unhurried, cutting through the silence the way a blade cuts through silk. Every head turned. King Caden Voss sat in the last row, one ankle crossed over his knee, his posture deceptively relaxed. He was not supposed to be here. Kings did not attend Omega auctions. Kings certainly did not sit in the back row like afterthoughts. And yet there he was, the most powerful alpha on the continent, offering a single coin for the Omega nobody wanted. The auctioneer blinked several times in rapid succession. Your Majesty, did you say 1 coin? Is there a competing bid? Caden asked. The silence was absolute. Then 1 coin should suffice, he said. Sable felt the weight of every gaze in the room shift between her and the king like a pendulum. Whispers erupted, sharp and scandalized, hissing through the rows. She could hear fragments. Why her? What is wrong with her? Is this a joke? Does he not know? Does he not know what? The gavel came down. The sound cracked through the hall like a bone breaking. Sold, the auctioneer managed, his voice strangled. Lot 97. To His Majesty, King Caden Voss, for 1 coin. A handler gripped her elbow and steered her off the platform. Sable's legs moved on their own because her mind had gone somewhere far away, somewhere safe and numb, where none of this was real. She was led down a corridor, through a heavy door, and into a courtyard where a carriage waited bearing the royal crest. The king was already there, standing beside the open carriage door, arms folded, watching her approach with an expression she couldn't read. Up close, he was taller than she had expected, broader, the kind of build that came from years of combat, not vanity. His dark hair was cut short, and there was a scar that ran from his left temple to the hinge of his jaw, thin and white and deliberate. Someone had tried to take his head once. They had failed. His scent hit her before she reached him. Cedar and iron and something beneath both that she had no name for, something that made the wolf inside her, silent and still for as long as she could remember, lift its head for the first time in her life. "Get in," the king said. Not unkind, but not warm either. Sable climbed into the carriage. He followed, settling onto the opposite bench. The door closed. The carriage lurched forward, and the auction hall fell away behind them. They rode in silence for several minutes. Sable kept her hands folded in her lap, kept her gaze on the floor, kept herself as small and unobtrusive as possible. She could feel him watching her. "You're not going to ask?" he said eventually. "Ask what, Your Majesty?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Why I bought you." She considered this. "Would you answer honestly?" Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe? Or interest? "No," he admitted. "Then I won't waste your time," Sable replied. The carriage wheels clattered over cobblestone. The king said nothing else for the rest of the ride. But when Sable glanced up once, just once, she found his eyes still on her, and the look in them was not what she expected. It was not pity. It was not amusement. It was recognition, sharp and startled, like a man who had just turned over a stone and found something he had been searching for without knowing he had been looking. Sable looked away, her pulse hammering, and told herself it meant nothing. She was wrong. The palace was a fortress dressed in marble. Every corridor stretched longer than the last, every ceiling arched higher. Every window framed a view designed to remind you how small you were. Sable followed 2 steps behind Mirette, the head of the king's household, who walked with the crisp efficiency of someone who had never wasted a second of her life. "You will be housed in the East Wing," Mirette said without looking back. "Meals are served at dawn and dusk with the household staff. You do not enter the West Wing without a summons. You do not address the king unless he speaks to you first. You do not leave the palace grounds." Sable absorbed each rule like a blow she had trained herself not to flinch from. "What will my duties be?" she asked. Mirette paused at a door and pushed it open. The room behind it was barely larger than a closet. A narrow bed, a washstand, a single window the size of a dinner plate. "No one has told me," Mirette said. "Which means the king has not decided yet. Or he has. And it is none of my concern." The door closed. Sable stood alone in the tiny room and breathed. She had spent her entire life being no one's concern. Raised in a commune of Omegas on the northern border, she had never known parents or pack. The commune was functional but loveless, a place where orphans were housed until they were old enough to be sold at auction. That was the system. Omegas without packs were property. Property got sold. She had always known her auction would go badly. The commune handlers had told her as much. Most Omegas carried a scent, something floral or sweet, or intoxicating to alphas. It was the primary measure of value. The stronger the scent, the higher the bid. Sable carried no scent at all. She had been tested at 12, again at 14, again at 16. Every result the same. Scentless. The handlers had called it a defect, and the word had settled into her bones like a splinter she could never quite dig out. A scentless Omega was worthless. No alpha would bond with what they could not smell. She was an invisible thing in a world built on instinct, and yet the king had bought her. For 1 coin. 3 days passed without explanation. No summons, no duties, no contact from anyone who mattered. She ate with the kitchen staff, who regarded her with polite bewilderment. She wandered the East Wing corridors during the hours she was permitted and read everything she could find in a small library tucked beside the servants' chapel. On the 4th morning, Corvus appeared. The king's shield, his personal guard and closest advisor. A beta with a face carved from granite and eyes that missed nothing. He materialized in her doorway without knocking. "Come with me," he said. He led her deep into the palace and stopped at double doors reinforced with iron bands. "The king's war room," he said. "He is in a strategy session with his generals. You will sit inside. You will not speak. You will not move. You will stay until I come for you." "Why?" Sable asked. Corvus looked at her for a long moment, his expression giving nothing away. "Because the king has ordered it." The war room was cavernous, maps pinned to every wall, candles burning in iron sconces that threw unsteady light across the stone. 8 men in military dress surrounded a long table. At its head, leaning over a spread of territorial maps with both palms flat on the wood, stood King Caden Voss. He did not look up when she entered. Corvus guided her to a chair against the far wall, positioned behind the king and to his left. She sat. The wood was hard and cold beneath her. The generals resumed their low, urgent discussion, debating troop movements along the eastern border. Sable watched the king. She could see the tension coiling through him like rope pulled past its limit, the set of his jaw, the whitened knuckles, the way his eyes moved too quickly across the maps, scanning without absorbing. He was forcing himself to function, and the effort was visible. 20 minutes passed, then 30. At the 40-minute mark, something changed. The rigid line of his shoulders softened by a fraction. His hands relaxed against the table. His breathing deepened. He blinked once, slowly. His chin dipped toward his chest, then caught. He straightened, pressed his fingers to his temple, and refocused. 5 minutes later, it happened again. This time, he did not catch himself. King Caden Voss, conqueror of the Ashen March, the alpha who had held the eastern border through 3 wars, sank into his chair and fell asleep at his own war table in front of 8 of his most senior generals. The room froze. 8 battle-hardened men stared at their sleeping king with identical expressions of stunned disbelief. One general reached toward the king's shoulder, and Corvus materialized behind him so fast the man flinched backward. "Do not touch him," Corvus hissed, barely audible. The generals were ushered out in absolute silence. The doors closed without a sound. And then it was just Sable, the shield, and the sleeping king. Corvus turned to her. His stone face had cracked, just slightly, and what she saw beneath it was not anger. It was not suspicion. It was desperate, staggering hope. "What did you do?" he whispered. "Nothing," Sable said, her own voice unsteady. "I just sat here." Corvus stared at her for a long time. Then he looked at the king, whose breathing had deepened into something slow and heavy and peaceful. The kind of sleep that looked like surrender. "He has not slept in 9 months, Corvus said, his voice barely a thread. "Not once. Not for a single minute." The words landed on Sable like stones dropped from a height. She opened her mouth, but before she could speak, the king stirred. His eyes opened, unfocused and disoriented, and for one unguarded moment he looked like someone who had forgotten where he was. Then his gaze found Sable, and something raw and unshielded passed across his face before vanishing behind iron control. He stood abruptly. "Clear the room." "It is already cleared, sire," Corvus said. The king glanced at Sable one more time, his expression locked down, giving nothing away. "Bring her to my study tonight," he told Corvus quietly, "after the household retires." He left without another word. The heavy door slammed behind him, and the sound echoed through the empty chamber like a verdict. Sable sat in the cold chair, her heart slamming against her ribs, and looked at Corvus. "Is he angry?" "I do not know," the shield admitted. And in a moment she had not seen before, something behind Corvus's composure cracked wide open, and what lived there was not confidence, but fear. "But whatever happens tonight, do not tell anyone what you just saw." He walked her back to her room in silence. At the door, he paused. "Tonight," he said. "Be ready." The door closed and Sable pressed her back against it, her pulse roaring in her ears. She had no scent, no value, no purpose anyone had ever been able to name, and the most dangerous alpha alive had just fallen asleep in her presence like a child laying down its head. She had no idea what it meant, but the desperate hope cracking through Corvus's iron face told her everything she needed to know about how much it mattered. The king's study was not what she had pictured. Bookshelves lined 2 walls, stuffed past capacity. A massive desk dominated the center, buried under correspondence and half-eaten meals no one had cleared. A fire burned in the hearth, casting warm, restless light. Sable stood 3 steps inside the door and tried to steady her breathing. Caden sat behind the desk, reading. He did not look up when Corvus escorted her in. The shield placed a chair near the hearth and gestured for her to sit. Then he positioned himself by the door, arms folded, watching. Minutes crawled past. Fire crackled. Pages turned. "You have no scent," the king said. Sable flinched. His voice came flat, observational, like he was reading from a report. "No, Your Majesty. The auction records list you as defective." The word landed exactly where it always did, in the soft place between her ribs where she kept the things that hurt most. "Yes, Your Majesty. And yet you walked into my war room this afternoon and I fell asleep for the first time in 9 months." A pause. "That is not what defective people do." She had no answer. Her hands were trembling, and she pressed them together hard enough to whiten the knuckles. Caden set his pen down, stood, and crossed to the hearth. He leaned against the mantel close enough that she could feel the heat of him competing with the fire. "I am going to tell you something," he said. "And then you are going to tell me if you can help." She lifted her eyes to his face. Firelight carved deep shadows beneath his cheekbones. He looked exhausted beyond the physical, hollowed out in a way that had no name. 9 months ago, I led a siege on the Thornwall Fortress. A warlord named Draven held it with 3,000 men who had been raiding our southern villages for 2 years. I offered terms. He burned my messenger alive and sent the ashes back in a box. His voice did not waver. He spoke about it the way someone describes weather. The siege lasted 6 weeks. When the wall fell, I lost 400 soldiers in the first hour. His fingers curled against his palms. There was a healer inside the fortress, a woman named Isla. She had nothing to do with the war. She stayed to treat the wounded on both sides. When the wall broke, she came out carrying a white banner. He stopped. The fire popped. I saw her. I was too far away. The rest hung between them like smoke. After the fortress fell, Draven's mother cursed me. Old power, the kind that runs through blood and bone. She said the dead would find me every time I closed my eyes, and they would keep me company until I joined them. His eyes met hers, and Sable recognized what lived in them with terrible clarity because she had seen it in her own reflection 1,000 times. Shame. The specific shame of someone who believes they deserve exactly what is happening to them. Every time I close my eyes, I am there. The dead are waiting. They stand and look at me, and I feel every single one of them. Every life I failed to save, every decision I made too slowly. He exhaled, long and controlled. Nothing works. Sedatives, enchantments, bonding rituals. My body is failing. Corvus believes I have 4 months before the damage becomes irreversible. The ground shifted beneath Sable's understanding of everything. The auction, the single coin, the war room. He had not bought her on a whim. He had been desperately searching for anything that could make him sleep. And somehow, the scentless Omega nobody wanted had done in 40 minutes what nothing else managed in 9 months. "I do not know why it works," she said honestly. "Neither do I," he replied. "But right now, that is enough." "Here is the arrangement," he said, straightening. "Each night, You will be escorted to quarters adjoining mine. You will sleep in a separate room with a door between us. If it continues to work, you stay. If it stops, you are free to go." His tone was clinical, but Sable could hear what lived beneath it, the thing he would never say out loud. "Please." "And if the court asks why I am here?" she said. "Let them ask." He crossed back to his desk. The audience was over. Corvus walked her through a narrow passage into a room connected to the king's chambers by a single door. Modest but clean, with a proper bed, thick blankets, and a window overlooking the eastern gardens. "This is yours," Corvus said. Sable ran her hand across the coverlet. An absurd, dangerous urge to cry rose in her throat so fast it nearly choked her. The bed was the softest thing she had ever touched. "Corvus," she said as he turned to leave, "the healer who died. He blames himself." "Of course he does. And you brought me here hoping I could fix it." The shield's expression fractured. What she saw behind it was the raw, exhausted terror of someone watching the person they had sworn to protect slowly die. "I brought you here hoping you could keep him alive long enough for us to find someone who can." The door closed. Sable sat on the edge of the bed and covered her eyes with both hands. She was an Omega with no scent, no pack, no bloodline, no value by any measure the world recognized. And she was the only thing standing between the Alpha King and his own death. Beyond the adjoining door, she heard him settle. The creak of furniture, the rustle of pages, the slow rhythm of a man forcing himself through another hour he did not have the strength for. Then she heard something she would carry for the rest of her life. A sound that was not quite a groan and not quite a sob. A single devastated exhale that carried so much weight, it made the walls feel thinner. Then silence. Sable pressed her hand flat against the door between them and whispered, "I do not know how to help you, but I am here." On the other side of the door, for the first time in 9 months, the king closed his eyes and did not dream of the dead. The arrangement began that night, and it worked. Sable lay in the adjoining room with the narrow door between them, listening to the sounds of the king preparing for sleep. The creak of the bed frame, the restless shifting of blankets. A long, controlled exhale like a man bracing for impact. Then silence. She waited for the sound she had been warned about. Corvus had pulled her aside before leaving and told her in clipped, careful sentences what usually happened. The thrashing, the strangled shouts, the way the king would claw at the sheets as though something beneath the surface was dragging him under. On the worst nights, he broke furniture. On the very worst, he broke himself. None of that happened. The silence held, deep and unbroken, and after an hour, Sable realized she was hearing something she had never heard before in the presence of another person. Stillness. Not the rigid, held-breath stillness of someone pretending, but the genuine, soft-edged quiet of a body at rest. The king was sleeping, truly sleeping, and whatever nightmares waited behind his eyelids, they had not come. By morning, word had spread through the palace with breathtaking speed. Nobody told Sable directly, but she could feel it in the way the kitchen staff looked at her over breakfast. Sidelong glances, voices dropping when she entered a room. Morette's expression when she passed Sable in the corridor was unreadable, but there was a quality to it that had not been there before. Wariness, perhaps, or calculation. The second night was the same, and the third, and the fourth. By the end of the first week, a rhythm had formed. Each evening after the household retired, Corvus would appear at her door and walk her through the narrow passage to the adjoining chamber. She would change into the sleeping clothes that had been left folded on the coverlet, lie down, and listen as the king settled on the other side of the door. Within the hour, silence. By morning, Corvus would be waiting to escort her back before the rest of the palace woke. They did not speak. She and the king existed in parallel lines that ran close enough to touch, but never crossed. She heard him through the wall, heard his breathing shift from waking tension to something deeper and slower, heard the occasional murmur of a dream that was not, for once, a nightmare. But they did not exchange a single word until the 8th night. Sable was lying in the dark, waiting for the silence to settle when she heard a sound she did not recognize. Not thrashing, not a shout, something quieter, a rhythmic tapping, soft and deliberate, against the shared wall. She sat up and pressed her ear to the cold stone. The tapping stopped. Then the king's voice came through the wall, muffled but distinct. "Are you awake?" Sable hesitated. He had told her the arrangement was clinical, transactional. A door between them, nothing more. "Yes," she said. A pause. "I slept 4 hours last night." "Do you know how long it has been since I slept 4 hours?" 9 months, she said quietly. "Before that," he said, "before the curse. During the siege itself I slept 2 hours a night at best. Before the siege, during the border campaigns, perhaps 3. I have not slept 4 hours in a single stretch since I was a boy." The weight of that settled over Sable and pressed the air from her lungs. "Your physicians must be pleased," she managed. A sound came through the wall that took her a moment to identify. It was laughter. Not much of it. Low and rough and clearly unpracticed, like a rusted hinge being forced open after years of neglect. But it was laughter, and it changed something in the air between them that she could not name. "Corvus has been insufferable," the king said. "He keeps finding excuses to check on me. Yesterday he walked into my study 3 times in an hour to adjust the curtains." Sable pressed her lips together to keep from smiling. "He cares about you. He is a shield. Caring is not in his duty." And yet, another pause. Longer this time. When the king spoke again, his voice had shifted. Lower, stripped of the dry amusement and left bare. "I want to ask you something, and I want the truth." "Yes, Your Majesty." "Does it cost you anything? Being here, doing whatever it is you do. Does it take something from you?" The question surprised her. She had expected him to ask how it worked, or what she was, or whether she could do more. She had not expected him to ask whether it hurt her. "No," she said. "I do not feel anything draining from me. I am here. That seems to be enough." "That does not make sense," he said. "No," she agreed. "It does not." Silence again, but different now. Not the tense silence of 2 strangers coexisting through a wall. Something had shifted. A thread had been pulled between them, thin and fragile, but real. "My name is Sable," she said. She did not know why she said it. He already knew her name. It was in the auction records, on the purchase documents, written in Mirette's ledger. But she needed to say it herself, to offer it rather than have it taken. "I know your name," the king said. "I know you know it. But nobody has asked me for it since I arrived. They call me Lot 97, or they call me the Omega, or they call me that girl. I wanted you to hear it from me." The silence that followed was the longest yet. "Sable," the king said. Just the name. Nothing else. But the way he said it, low and careful, like he was learning the weight of it, the shape of it on his tongue, made something tighten behind her ribs in a way that had nothing to do with pain. "Good night, Your Majesty," she whispered. "Caden," he said. She blinked in the darkness. "What?" "My name. If you are giving me yours, it seems only fair." Another pause. "You may use it when we are alone." Sable pressed her forehead against the cool stone wall and closed her eyes. Her heart was doing something complicated, beating in a pattern she did not recognize, something faster and softer and more dangerous than anything she had felt before. "Good night, Caden," she said. She heard him exhale on the other side of the wall, long and slow, and then the silence returned. But this time, it was warm. This time, it held. Sable lay back in the darkness and stared at the ceiling, her hand resting against the wall where his voice had come through. She was an Omega with no scent in a king's palace, sleeping behind a door she had not chosen, bound to a man she did not know by a power she could not explain. And for the first time in her life, the loneliness that had lived inside her like a second heartbeat went quiet. That terrified her more than the curse ever could. 3 weeks into the arrangement, the court began to notice. Sable felt the shift the way an animal feels a change in weather, not through any single sign, but through 100 small ones that gathered into certainty. The glances in the corridors grew sharper. Conversation stopped mid-sentence when she passed. A serving girl who had been friendly enough at breakfast began seating herself at the far end of the table without explanation. Marette delivered the news with her usual efficiency. The King's Council has requested a formal explanation for your presence in his private quarters. Sable was standing in her small East Wing room, folding the sleeping clothes that were laundered and returned to her each morning. She kept her hands steady. And what did the king tell them? He told them to concern themselves with the eastern border and leave his household arrangements to him. Marette paused in the doorway, and something shifted behind her careful expression. That answer will not hold forever. It held for exactly 4 more days. On the 26th night, Sable was lying in the dark listening to Caden's breathing settle into sleep when she heard something else. Footsteps in the corridor outside his chambers. Not Corvus's measured tread, which she had learned to recognize by its rhythm. These were lighter, quicker, and they stopped just outside the king's door. A murmur of voices. Then a woman's voice, clear enough to carry through the stone. The council will not tolerate this. An unsanctioned Omega in the king's bed? The bonding protocols exist for a reason. A man's voice answered, too low to make out the words. She has no scent, the woman continued, and the contempt in her voice landed in Sable's chest like a fist. She has no bloodline, no pack affiliation, no bonding compatibility. She is nothing. And the king is making himself a fool over nothing. The footsteps retreated. Silence returned. Sable stared at the ceiling and breathed through the tightness in her throat. She had heard variations of those words her entire life. They should not have hurt anymore. They did. Through the wall, the king's breathing had changed. He was awake. You heard that? He said. Not a question. Yes. A long silence. The woman's name is Vera Marath. She sits on the bonding council. She has been trying to arrange a political match for me since I took the throne. She is not wrong, Sable said quietly. About what I am. She is entirely wrong, Caden said, and something in his voice was different. Not the dry, controlled tone she had grown accustomed to. Something hotter, rayer. She looks at you and sees an empty column on a registry. No scent, no pack, no value. She does not see that I have slept more in the last 3 weeks than I have in the past year. She does not see that the tremor in my hands has stopped, that I can read a full report without losing my place, that I held a 6-hour strategy session yesterday without my vision going dark. The words kept coming, and each one landed on Sable like a hand pressed against a wound she had stopped believing could be healed. You are not nothing, the king said, and anyone who says otherwise will answer to me. Sable laid her palm against the wall and said nothing because her throat had closed entirely. They lay in silence after that. But before Sable drifted off, she heard Caden murmur something she was not sure she was meant to hear. I should have paid more than 1 coin. She fell asleep with her hand still against the wall, and in the morning the stone beneath her fingers was warm. The confrontation with the council came 2 days later. Sable was not present, but she heard about it afterward from Corvus, who delivered the account in his usual clipped manner while walking her to dinner. The king informed the bonding council that the arrangement is a medical necessity. He presented the physician's reports documenting his sleep improvement. He told Vera Marath that if she brought the matter before the full court, he would consider it a personal challenge to his authority. How did she respond? She smiled, Corvus said. That is worse than if she had argued. Sable stopped walking. What does that mean? It means she has another strategy, Corvus said, and the flatness of his tone did not quite conceal the worry beneath it. Vera Marath does not lose gracefully. She repositions. Whatever she does next will be quieter and considerably more dangerous. The warning settled into Sable's bones alongside everything else she was carrying, but she filed it away and kept moving. There was nothing she could do about Vera Marath tonight. There was only the next night, and the next, and the narrow door, and the king's breathing on the other side of the wall. That night, the king did something he had never done before. He asked Sable to stay in his study while he worked, rather than going directly to the adjoining room. He did not explain. He simply gestured to the chair by the hearth when Corvus brought her in, and she sat, and he wrote, and neither of them spoke for 2 hours. It was the most peaceful 2 hours Sable had experienced since arriving at the palace. At some point she must have dozed, because she woke to find a blanket draped over her shoulders that had not been there before. The fire had been stoked. The candles had been repositioned so the light did not fall on her face. The king was still at his desk, writing. But his pen had stopped, and he was looking at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not the locked-down control, not the clinical distance. Something unguarded, something almost tender. Gone so fast she would have missed it if she had blinked. He looked away the instant he realized she was awake. "You should go to bed," he said. His voice was rough. Sable stood, pulling the blanket around her shoulders without thinking, and walked toward the adjoining door. She paused with her hand on the latch. "Caden." He did not look up. "Yes. Thank you for the blanket." It was cold in the room. "It was not cold," she said softly. His pen stopped. The silence between them was so charged she could feel it against her skin. Electric and fragile, like the air before a storm. She went through the door and closed it behind her, leaning against it, pressing both hands flat against the wood. Her heart was hammering. Not from fear, from the realization that somewhere in the last 3 weeks, behind a door she had not chosen, and through a wall she had never asked to share, she had begun to feel something for the king that had nothing to do with curses or arrangements or survival. And on the other side of that door she heard his pen hit the desk. He did not pick it up again for a very long time. The first nightmare in 29 days came without warning. Sable woke to a sound that turned her blood to ice. Not a shout. Worse. A low, guttural keening, the kind of sound a wounded animal makes when it has stopped trying to escape and is simply enduring. It came through the wall like something clawing through stone. She was on her feet before she was fully conscious, her hand on the adjoining door. Every instinct screaming at her to open it. But Corvus had been explicit. The door stays closed. If the king wakes in a state, he is dangerous. He is an alpha in the grip of a curse, and his wolf does not distinguish friend from threat. The sound came again, and this time it resolved into words. Isla. The banner. She is carrying the banner. Sable's hand tightened on the latch until her knuckles ached. She pressed her forehead against the door and spoke, not loudly, but with every ounce of steadiness she could summon. Caden, you are in the palace. You are in your chambers. The siege is over. The keening broke into ragged breathing. A crash. Furniture hitting stone. Then his voice, wrecked and barely recognizable. I can see them. They are standing at the wall. All of them. They are looking at me. Listen to my voice, Sable said, her own hands shaking now. The wall is gone. The fortress is gone. You are here. You are safe. I am not, he said. I have never been safe. That is the point. That is what she wanted me to understand. The anguish in his voice split something open inside Sable's chest. She could feel the curse through the door like heat through metal, a wrongness that pressed against her awareness, heavy and dark and deliberate. It was not mindless. It was not random. It was designed to make him suffer, to keep him locked in the worst moment of his life until the weight of it crushed him. And it was angry. She could sense that too. A cold, patient intelligence behind the darkness that did not want him healed. It wanted him destroyed. The healer, he whispered. She was carrying a white banner. My men. They could not see it. The blood, and the smoke, and the fury. She walked into it carrying a white banner, and I was too far away, and I watched her fall. I watched her fall, and I could not. I was not fast enough. Sable slid down the door until she was sitting on the floor, her back pressed against the wood, tears running silently down her face. She could not fix this. She could not reach through the curse and pull him out. She could not undo the death of a healer she had never known, or absolve a king of guilt he would carry until it killed him. But she could stay. I am here, she said. Right here, on the other side of this door. And I am not leaving. His breathing was still ragged, but the edge of it softened. The crash of furniture stopped. She heard him settle, heard the creak of him lowering himself to the floor on the other side, mirrors of each other with only the wood between them. Tell me something, he said. Anything. Something that has nothing to do with sieges or curses or dead women carrying banners. Sable closed her eyes and searched for something small and ordinary and true. When I was 11, the commune had a kitchen cat, a massive orange tabby named Biscuit who stole bread rolls off the cooling racks. The head cook despised him. She chased him with a broom every single morning and swore she would throw him out. But every night I would find her in the kitchen after hours, feeding him scraps of roast meat from her own plate and talking to him about her day. Silence. Then, impossibly, a breath that sounded like it wanted to be a laugh, but had forgotten how. Biscuit, the king repeated. He lived to be 19 years old, and when he finally died, the head cook did not speak for 3 days. She set his bowl by the fire every evening for a month afterward, and none of us had the heart to move it. Another almost laugh. Quieter. The ragged edge of his breathing was smoothing out, the panic receding like a tide pulling back from shore. Sable. Yes. This arrangement. It is not. It cannot be. He stopped, started again, and his voice was stripped down to something she had never heard from him. Not the king, not the conqueror. Just a man sitting in the dark, terrified of what he was about to say. It cannot be just an arrangement anymore. Not for me. The words hit her like sunlight through a crack in a wall, blinding and warm and agonizing all at once because she felt the same thing, had been feeling it for days, and the joy of hearing it said aloud was inseparable from the terror of what it meant. Caden, she started. No, he said, and his voice hardened so fast it was like watching a door slam. Forget I said that. It was the nightmare. I was not thinking clearly. That is not true. It does not matter whether it is true. It matters that I am a cursed king who bought you at auction for 1 coin, and you did not choose to be here, and I will not be another cage you were placed inside without your consent. You have spent your entire life being told what you are and where you belong. I will not add my name to that list. The words were precise and brutal and aimed entirely at himself. And they were, Sable realized with a clarity that cut like glass, the most loving thing anyone had ever said to her. He was not rejecting her. He was refusing to trap her. You should request reassignment to the East Wing, he continued, his voice hardening with every word as though he were building a wall in real time. Corvus will ensure the transition is handled quietly. The arrangement has served its purpose, and I have no right to ask more of you than you were brought here to give. Sable sat on the floor with her back against the door and felt the thread between them, the one that had been growing stronger every night, every word through the wall, every careful silence, pull taut and begin to fray. "Is that what you want?" she asked. The silence that followed was the loudest thing she had ever heard. "What I want," the king said, his voice barely audible, "has never been the point." He did not speak again. After an hour, his breathing deepened into sleep, but it was fitful, restless, nothing like the deep stillness of the weeks before. Sable sat against the door until dawn, her tears drying on her face, her hand pressed flat against the wood. He was sending her away? Not because he wanted to, because he believed she deserved better than a man who had bought her like livestock and could not close his eyes without seeing the dead. And the worst part, the part that sat in her chest like a stone she could not swallow, was that he was wrong. He was completely, devastatingly wrong, but he was the king, and she was the omega with no cent, and he had already made his decision. By morning, the door between their rooms was locked from his side. The first night without her was the worst of his life. Caden lay in the dark and felt the curse rush back like floodwater through a broken dam. The dead returned within minutes, pouring into his mind the instant his eyes closed. They stood at the wall, covered in blood and ash, their eyes fixed on him with the silent, immovable patience of those who have nothing left to lose. Isla was in the center, the white banner still clutched in her hands, her mouth open in a call for mercy that would never arrive. He lasted 2 hours before the seizure hit, his body locked rigid, every muscle from his jaw to his ankles contracting at once. Corvus found him on the floor, shaking, his hands clenched so tight the knuckles had gone white. "This is madness," Corvus said, kneeling beside him. "Bring her back." "No." The word came out broken, torn from between clenched teeth. "You will die." "Then I will die without taking her down with me." Corvus stood over him, and in all their years together, the shield's composure did not crack. It shattered. "You are not protecting her. You are punishing yourself because you believe you do not deserve what she gives you, and you are killing yourself in the process." The king said nothing. There was nothing to say that Corvus had not already named. Sable was returned to her closet room in the east wing before breakfast. Maret handled the transition with efficient silence, collecting the sleeping clothes, the soap, the small comforts that had accumulated over the weeks. She did not ask questions. She did not meet Sable's eyes. The first day was numb. The second was worse. By the third, Sable could feel something inside her that she had not known existed beginning to fracture. The wolf that had stirred when she first caught the king's scent, the one that had been slowly waking over the weeks of proximity, was howling in her chest with a grief so sharp it stole her breath. She could not eat. The kitchen staff noticed but said nothing. She could not sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she reached for the wall that was no longer there, listening for breathing that had gone silent. On the fourth day, Corvus found her in the library. He did not sit down. "He is dying," the shield said flatly. "The seizures have returned. He has not slept since you were removed. The physicians have doubled the sedatives. They do nothing." Sable looked up from the book she had not been reading. "He told me to leave." "He told you to leave because he is a stubborn, guilt-ridden fool who believes his suffering is justified. That does not make him right." "He is the king. I cannot go where I am not wanted." Corvus's jaw tightened. "You know that is not the problem. He wants you there more than he wants to breathe. That is precisely why he sent you away." The words hung in the air between them. Sable closed the book and stared at the shelf in front of her until the titles blurred. "What do you want me to do, Corvus? Walk into the king's chambers uninvited and tell him his noble sacrifice is killing him?" "Yes," Corvus said. "That is exactly what I want you to do." She looked at him. The shield's expression was locked down as always, but his eyes were red-rimmed, and there were shadows beneath them that had not been there a week ago. He was not sleeping either. He was standing watch over a man who was grinding himself to dust, and every hour brought them both closer to an edge they could not come back from. "He locked the door," she said. "I have keys to every door in this palace. He ordered me reassigned. He orders things he does not mean when he is afraid. I have watched him do it for 15 years. He ordered a retreat at the Battle of Kelmarsh that would have lost us the entire Eastern Front. I ignored that order, and we held the line. He was furious for a week, and grateful for the rest of his life." Sable stood. Her body felt brittle, hollowed out, running on something that was not quite strength and not quite desperation, but lived in the space between. "If I go to him and he sends me away again," she said, "I will not survive it a second time." Corvus held her gaze, and for a single moment, the stone crumbled entirely. "If you do not go to him," he said quietly, "none of us will survive it at all." He held out a key. Iron, heavy, old enough that the teeth had been worn smooth with use. The key to the adjoining door. Sable took it. The metal was cold against her palm, and the weight of it was so much more than iron. "He is in his chambers," Corvus said. "He has not left them in 2 days. The physicians were dismissed this morning after the 3rd seizure. He will not let anyone near him." "And you think he will let me near him?" "I think you are the only thing in this palace that his wolf recognizes as safe," Corvus said. "And I think if you do not walk through that door tonight, there will be no door left to walk through." He turned and left without another word. Sable stood in the empty library holding the key, feeling the weight of a choice that was not really a choice at all. The king had given her freedom. He had unlocked her cage and told her to go, and it was the most selfless thing anyone had ever done for her, and it was going to kill him. She could walk away. She owed him nothing. He had bought her for 1 coin and kept her behind a door, and never once asked her what she wanted. But that was not true either, and she knew it. He had asked. Through the wall, in the dark, he had asked if it cost her anything. He had draped a blanket over her shoulders. He had said her name like it was something worth learning. He had told the most powerful woman on the bonding council that Sable was not nothing and meant every syllable. And then he had sent her away because he believed she deserved better than him. Sable closed her fingers around the key until the iron bit into her skin. She did not go to dinner. She did not go to her room. She went to his door. The key turned in the lock with a sound like a held breath finally released. Sable pushed the door open and stepped into the king's chambers. The room was dark except for the dying embers in the hearth, their faint orange glow casting long shadows across the walls. The air smelled wrong. Stale sweat, cold stone, and beneath it something darker, the acrid bite of a body running on nothing but adrenaline and will. Caden was on the floor beside the bed, not sleeping, not resting. He was sitting with his back against the bed frame, his knees drawn up, his hands gripping his own forearms so hard the tendons stood rigid beneath his skin. His eyes were open, fixed on something she could not see, and his breathing came in short, shallow bursts that sounded rationed. He looked defeated, not beaten in battle but worn down from the inside, hollowed out by something no sword could reach. "Get out," he said. His voice was gravel and broken glass. "No," Sable said. "I gave you an order. You are not my king right now. You are a man sitting on the floor in the dark, and you are dying, and I am not leaving." His jaw clenched so hard she could hear his teeth grind. "You do not understand what you are walking into. The curse is, it is worse now. Worse than before. It knows you were here and it knows you left, and it has been punishing me for both. Then stop punishing yourself on top of it." She crossed the room and knelt in front of him. Close enough to touch. She did not touch him. Not yet. She could see the curse working in him now. Not as a metaphor, but as something almost physical. His pupils were dilated past what the darkness could explain, and there was a tremor running through his body in waves, like something beneath his skin was trying to shake itself loose. "The dead are here," he whispered. "In the room. Right now. Standing behind you." Sable did not turn around. She held his gaze and kept her voice steady. "Then let them watch." Something cracked in his expression. Not the iron control he wore like armor. Something deeper, older. The wall he had built between himself and the possibility that he deserved anything other than suffering. "I killed her," he said. "Isla, the healer with the white banner. My war, my siege, my orders. She died because I brought violence to her doorstep and I was too slow to stop what followed." "You did not kill her," Sable said. "A war killed her. A warlord who burned messengers alive and held a fortress full of civilians killed her. You tried to save her, and you were not fast enough. And you have been carrying that failure like a death sentence ever since." "It was my responsibility." "Yes, and you failed. And a good woman died. And that is a grief you will carry for the rest of your life." She leaned closer, and her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "But grief is not the same as guilt, and guilt is not the same as deserving to die. Draven's mother cursed you because she wanted you to suffer, not because you earned it. She lost her son, and she wanted you to lose everything, and you have been helping her do it. Every night you refuse to sleep, every person you push away, every time you tell yourself you deserve this, you are finishing her work for her." The tremor in his body intensified. His breathing fractured. She watched the battle play out across his face, watched him fight against every word she had said, searching for reasons to reject it because accepting it would mean he had been destroying himself for nothing. "I cannot stop seeing them," he said, and his voice broke on the last word in a way that made Sable's chest seize. "You do not have to stop seeing them," she said. "You have to stop believing they came to condemn you. You told me they stand and look at you. What if they are not judging you, Caden? What if they are waiting for you to forgive yourself so they can rest?" The silence that followed was unlike any silence she had experienced. It was not empty. It was full, packed tight with something enormous trying to move through a space too small to contain it. Then the king's hands released his forearms. The white-knuckle grip loosened, finger by finger, and his arms fell to his sides. The tremor did not stop entirely, but it softened, downgrading from a quake to a shudder. "I do not know how to do that," he said. "I know," Sable said. "We will figure it out." She reached forward and took his hands. The contact was electric, not in the way the romance ballads described, but in the way a circuit closes. Something incomplete suddenly made whole. She felt it in her bones, in the place where her wolf had been stirring for weeks, in the silent, scentless core of herself that the world had called defective. She felt it snap into place like a key turning in a lock that had been waiting for exactly this shape. His fingers closed around hers, tight, desperate, like a drowning man finding something solid in a current that had been pulling him under for 9 months. "You came back," he said. "I was never going to stay away. I locked the door. Corvus has keys to every door in this palace." That sound again. The rough, unpracticed laugh that cracked through his defenses like nothing else could. It was wet this time, tangled up with something that was not quite a sob, and it was the most human sound she had ever heard from him. "I am going to sit here with you," Sable said, "and you are going to close your eyes. And if the dead come, I will be right here. They can look at both of us." He stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, carefully, with the caution of someone who has forgotten what trust feels like, he leaned forward and rested his forehead against hers. The contact was featherlight. She could feel his breath against her lips, feel the exhaustion pouring off him in waves, feel the last of his resistance crumble into something that was not weakness, but surrender. "Both of us," he repeated. "Both of us." His eyes closed. His breathing slowed. The tremor faded, degree by degree, until his body was still. His hand stayed wrapped around hers, and in the fading glow of the embers, the most powerful alpha on the continent fell asleep on the floor of his own chambers, with his forehead pressed against the scentless Omega who had cost him 1 coin. The dead did not come. For the first time, they did not come at all. The court never got its explanation. Vera Morath brought her challenge before the full council 3 weeks later, demanding the king submit to the traditional bonding protocols and dismiss the unsanctioned Omega from his household. Caden listened to her argument from his throne with the kind of patient, rested composure that a man who sleeps 7 hours a night can afford, and then he declined. The word he used was no, just the one word. No preamble, no justification, no debate. The council erupted. Vera Morath smiled her dangerous smile, and the king stood, offered his hand to the Omega seated in the chair beside his throne, a chair that had not existed before that morning and had been placed there on his personal instruction, and walked out. The physicians confirmed what Corvus had known for weeks. The curse was not broken. It was still there, coiled in the depths of the king's mind like a serpent waiting for an opening. But it could not reach him while she was near. Her presence, the scentless, unexplainable stillness of her, created a space the curse could not enter. The healers had theories, a rare nullifying gift, a latent bloodline power, a bond that preceded scent altogether, something older and deeper that the modern world had forgotten how to name. Sable did not care what they called it. She cared that he slept. She cared that the tremor in his hands was gone, and the shadows beneath his eyes were fading, and the dry, unpracticed laugh came a little easier each week. She cared that he said her name every morning like it was the first word he wanted to speak each day, and that he had stopped apologizing for the 1 coin, and that the door between their rooms stood open now, always open, because neither of them could bear to close it. On a cold evening in late winter, Sable stood at the window of the king's study watching snow fall over the eastern gardens. Caden was at his desk, not working, just watching her the way he sometimes did when he thought she was not paying attention. "Sable," he said. She turned. He was holding something in his hand, small, round, catching the firelight. A coin. 1 coin, polished until it gleamed, threaded on a fine silver chain. "I have been thinking about what to pay you," he said, "and I have decided that the original price was exactly right. Because you were never something to be bought. You were something to be found." Sable crossed the room, took the chain from his hand, and fastened it around her neck. The coin rested against her collarbone, cool and light, the weight of nothing and everything at the same time. "Found," she repeated, and smiled. The king smiled back, not the controlled, careful expression he showed the court. A real smile, wide and unguarded and slightly crooked on the left side, where the scar pulled at his jaw. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the fire burned steady and warm. And the door between their rooms stayed open through the night, and the night after that, and every night that followed, because some doors, once opened, are never meant to close again.